This is April 29th, and this is your Migration Minute. Let's do it. We're starting this much later tonight, so we need to move a little bit faster than normal. Didn't even give the full introduction. Didn't even have a mustache anywhere to be seen, but we'll do this anyway. So looking at last night, we had 315 million birds at the peak moment in the nighttime migration, the nocturnal migration. Where were the birds moving? Well, first, let's look at where they weren't moving. Obviously, there was some sort of system there, some sort of system in that area, and something in the Rockies there. That's where the birds weren't. So where were they? Well, they were everywhere else. Again, the biggest part of migration was kind of right there. Oh, we don't want that. Let's do this right here. But then also, you can see from Florida up through the eastern Great Lakes states, a lot of great movement there. That's because we are starting to get to that time of year where the peak migration is happening further and further north, though we're still going to have some big movements down in those Gulf Coast states. They're still going to get some amazing nights, but amazing nights are going to start to happen in other places. So, big movement all across the lower 48. You can see out west we had some big movement finally, including the northern Great Plains. Big movement up there. And then all the way into the northeast, there was some decent movement, including what I already showed you in that region there. So a lot of big movement last night. Again, at the peak, 315 million birds. The night before at the peak, 370 million birds. And then the night before that, that was when we were in the 499 million range, that 500 million range, I believe. And so that's at the peak moment. That's not even the total number of birds. That's just peak moment of migration and peak moment of migration over 3 nights. We are well over 1 billion birds the last 3 nights. When you add up how many birds total were moving, probably well over that billion and a half. And who knows, we might even be edging to the 2 billion mark. Hard to say. Let's go to our next map. Looking to tonight, what's happening? Well, less movement. You're going to see that number drastically drops tonight and for the next few nights. It's a much lower number than we've been seeing. There's a lot of storm systems blocking a lot of movements. Where we had movement last night, and there are some birds still staying over in those areas, these storm systems holding a lot of the migration back. So where is it happening? Well, off the Pacific coast, good numbers of birds. Throughout the southern Great Plains, good numbers of birds. And the Gulf Coast states still seeing some movement. Even with that system there, there's some birds still moving in those areas. Looking ahead to tomorrow night, where's the movement? Well, still a lot of systems. You can see all of these weather events still kind of throwing things off. So tomorrow night, another low night in migration. That does not mean we're past the peak. In some parts of the country, the peak has still yet to occur. But there's clearly a lot of something happening that's slowing down our migration. So we're not seeing as many birds at the moment, but a lot of birds are still going to be coming. Off the Pacific coast tomorrow night, lots of birds. Again, those Gulf Coast states, lots of birds. And then throughout the Great Plains, it looks like there's in fact this nice little area throughout the Great Plains where lots of birds are going to be moving. So that is tomorrow night. Let's move ahead to the following night. So the night of May 1st, still some movement up in the Pacific Northwest, although that storm system's moving in. Down in the desert Southwest, into Southern California, a little bit of the Gulf Coast area, mostly Florida, up some of the Atlantic states, there's a little bit. You can see it's pretty patchy. Clearly, these systems that are moving through are creating some sort of disturbance and has changed where the buildup of birds are, and that we're just not seeing any one consistent area with migration. There's no big open channel for all these birds to be passing through because we've got all of these weird storm systems that are changing all of the areas where the birds feel comfortable moving. Let's look ahead to our lights out alerts. Our lights out alerts are the places where we need to do more on these nights to help our nocturnal migrants. So where do we need to focus our efforts? Well, tonight, that Pacific coast, you are lit up with lights out alerts, heavily populated areas, good numbers of birds moving. That is a recipe for hardship for birds. Where else? You can see throughout some of the Great Plains states, there's some lights out alerts as well. And then from West Texas down through all of those coastal areas of the Gulf, lights out alerts all across those areas because a lot of birds are going to be moving into those areas, though they're not going to go far out of the coastal states there along the Gulf. Moving to tomorrow night, where the lights out alerts tomorrow night? Well, as you saw, a lot fewer birds moving tomorrow night, so not as many lights out alerts. The big one, from Central California up through the Pacific Northwest, a little bit down in these Gulf areas, and then we've got some medium lights out alerts scattered throughout Appalachia, the Smokies, and then desert Southwest a little bit, and then you can see even the Rockies and some of the Great Plains. We're in the medium to low areas of these lights out alerts. And for our last lights out alert, for the night of May 1st, things starting to pick back up that night. Still not a big night, but a bigger night. Where are we seeing we need lights out? Again, basically from the western most third of the lower 48 out to the Pacific coast. Lights out alerts in those areas. Lights out alerts up in the Dakotas, big area up there in the Dakotas that we're going to need some lights out. And then parts of the Rockies, you can see down into some of the Great Plains out here, and then some of the Atlantic coastal areas. We're going to need lights out in those areas, but still not a lot of movement out east on this night, so fewer lights out alerts in those areas, although it's always great to get lights out, to get windows treated. I use a flock blocker, theflockblocker.com, but getting lights out is a big help to birds, and doing things to create safer windows will also help our migratory birds get back to where they're headed safely. It's a much slower upcoming 3 days in migration, but I still ask you, what are you going to do when migration mania comes for you? If you got that joke, you clearly are someone who grew up with some interesting taste, because now you're into birds. Anyways, not a lot's happening the next 3 nights, at least compared to the previous few nights. But migration is still happening, and we're still waiting on some even bigger nights potentially happening, though we might have hit our biggest nights. And now what we're going to see is it's going to just be a long, slow, scattered out. Though, as we look at historical data, we're still in that area where we can get some really big peaks coming up. So that's how it happens. There's peaks and valleys throughout migration because of weather patterns, because of timing. A lot of different elements are at play. So we might still be waiting for some big nights. And depending upon where you're at throughout North America, you may still be waiting for your biggest night. So go out there, shut your lights off, treat your windows. If you have feeders, fill your feeders. If you have a garden, get your native plants planted for the season. Do your best. Help our birds as they're coming back to spend the summer with us. For your April 29th Migration Minute, I'm Richard Sissel. See you soon.